Have you heard about this new cheap MacBook that supply-side analyst Guoming Chi claims Apple is working on for later this year? Or early next? Picture this. 13-inch display, silver, blue, pink, and yellow colorways, and an A18 Pro chipset. Yeah, I kid you not. The Apple silicon that's currently powering the iPhone 16 series, not the M4 in the vast majority of the Mac lineup. Not the M4 in the latest 13-inch MacBook Air in sky blue, silver, starlight, or midnight, available on apple.com for $1,000 even. And more interesting and relevant here, not even the M1 in the 5-year-old 13-inch MacBook Air in gold, silver, or gray, still available at Walmart for $650. Exclusively, the cheapest retail non-refurb nor resale MacBook ever, and pretty much the low-key poster child for Apple's down-market strategy, which is not making new products that are cheap as in crappy, but keeping existing products on the market until they become cheap as in economies of scale. And this goes all the way back to the birth of the OG MacBook Air. Remember this, tiny, cheap netbooks were popping up like tribbles in a grain bin everywhere. And Apple chose not to compete with them, like at all. We don't know how to make a $500 computer that's not a piece of junk.
We can't do it. We just can't ship junk.
So while competitors were churning out zero margin, ugly slabs of mostly plastic and spectacularly failing to make it up on volume, Apple thought different. Maybe the tiny part was separate from the cheap part. And maybe, just maybe, there was a market for a tiny-ish laptop that was the opposite of crap and cheap. One that was premium. Less for the we'll take Linux over paying for a Windows license crowd, and more for the we're jet setting over the country in business class. And so Apple launched the MacBook Air in 2008 for upwards of $1,800. But over time, they also pushed the second and subsequent generation Airs down in price until they hit $1,000. Still not cheap, but for Apple, not nearly nowhere as expensive. And now, most recently, that old M1 model for $650, if only at Walmart. And where Apple usually uses new designs to make previous ones look instantly old and outdated, with the MacBook Air and the iPhone SE, they've leveraged what became classic designs, iconic designs sometimes, to make them feel timeless. So why zag into the A18 Pro after so many years of zigging with M1? Why not just keep Old Faithful poppin' for another half decade or more? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Specific technology only gets cheaper at scale and over time until it doesn't. M1 is fabbed on TSMC's 2020 era 5nm process. A18 Pro is fabbed on TSMC's 2025 era 2nd generation 3nm process. And yeah, those are marketing terms, but a bleeding edge node is typically much more expensive than a mainstream node. When those mainstream nodes start to become legacy and you start having to pay to keep them in service, when nothing else wants or needs them, and pressure mounts to rip and replace them with the next generation bleeding edge node, the whole value proposition can turn on its head, and quickly. So when A19 Pro comes online for the iPhone 17 this year, and capacity is freed up on the A18 Pro, rather than or alongside just shoving them into lower tier iPads, like they did with the iPad mini on the A17 Pro or iPad Nothing on the A16 Amateur, Apple could shove them into lower tier Macs now as well. It's basically the OG iPhone SE strategy. Old design, new chip, low for Apple pricing. And it's not like Apple is allergic to running macOS on iPhone chips anyway. I mean, that is exactly what they did for years and years in all the various experimental and prototype stages. And it's pretty much exactly what they did for the Apple Silicon Dev Kit. They ran it on an iPad variant of an iPhone chip. And this one specifically might be the first A series that's maybe kinda hot take swappable with M1. I mean, A18 Pro has two 4.04 GHz 2nd gen 3nm ARM v9 performance cores to M1's four 3.2 GHz 1st generation 5nm ARM v8 cores, four 2.42 GHz efficiency cores with the same process and instruction set diffs to the four 2.06 GHz E cores, six G17 equivalent GPU cores with ray tracing to 7 bin down from 8 G13 GPUs that ain't tracing no rays, 16 Apple Neural Engine cores at 35 trillion operations per second to 16 A&E cores at 11 trillion ops, and here's the kicker for entry-level creators, dedicated media engines for H.264, HEVC, and ProRes encode decode, and AV1 decode, where that wasn't really a thing Apple even talked about for M1 until the Pro and Max variants. And as my MacBreak Weekly tag-in, Jason Snell, pointed out, it makes A18 Pro almost 50% faster than M1 on single core and pretty much the same on multi-core, albeit with fewer cores to multi. But for this most entry of levels, and for workloads that are probably most closely attuned to single core speeds, basically a glorified Safari book, way more than a massively multi-core parallel workstation, it's fine. And yes, sure, absolutely, I can feel some of my fellow Apple nerds smashing their cherry red mechanicals in outrage. A-series iPhone silicon doesn't have Thunderbolt controllers like M-series Mac silicon does. And you're right, you're totally right. It doesn't have Rosetta Intel binary accelerators or other Mac-specific IP either. But like 5 years post-transition, are the kids even running Intel binaries anymore? Like, deadass ARM is cracked, lock it in chat? Cringe. Now that does mean iPhone 16 Pro USB-C speeds of 10 gigabits per second rather than M1 MacBook Air 40 gigabits per second. But again, for the types of customers wanting to enter at sub-entry level prices, that's probably not even close to a deal breaker. Would it mean only one USB-C port like an iPhone, which isn't unheard of for MacBooks? The 2015 12-inch MacBook Nothing infamously, had only one USB-C port, the first ever commercial USB-C port. But MacBook Airs have typically had at least two. And when Apple plucked the A12Z from the single-port iPad Pro and hot-pocketed it into the Mac Mini-shaped dev kit, they also split it out into multiple USB-C, USB-A, HDMI, and Ethernet ports, because even a single solitary USB-C controller can typically support multiple USB-C endpoints, many multiple, hopefully including MagSafe. And Apple should be able, and more importantly willing, to provide enough bandwidth and power to equal the I/O of the Air. Perhaps even more key to all this, A18 Pro also supports 8 gigabytes of memory, which is more than any iPhone chip before it, and equivalent to the 8 gigabytes found in that $650 M1 MacBook. Which, yes, for the Mac, as blessings go, is kinda mixed at best. 8 gigabytes felt stingy in 2020, and it's gonna feel like an absolute crime in 2026, especially if, unlike the M series, there's no way to even pay Apple's ridiculous markup for more. Hopefully the storage won't be locked at 256 gigabytes though, since A18 Pro does currently go all the way to 1 terabyte for the low markup of 500 more bucks, which ain't nothing, even though M1 could take the TBs all the way to 2. But would Apple keep the wedge design, go with the current Air chassis, make every certain type of Apple nerd's dream come true and cram it into something closer akin to the 12-inch MacBook Nothing or 11-inch MacBook Air? And would it stay exclusive to Walmart or also be available via other outlets up to and including Apple.com? Would the pricing be slot in just below the Air at like $900? Would it take over that $650 slot? Or would it drop even closer to that magical $500 number? Guo does say that the point of this everything old is new again MacBook is to help Apple hit pandemic level sales volumes again next year, and that it could account for up to a fifth or more of those numbers, meaning it's not intended to pull many sales from the M4 MacBook Air or the presumable M5 MacBook Air to follow. It's supposed to be additive. It's supposed to entice people who want a MacBook but just can't pay full price for one. It's not supposed to be more for less or even same for less. It's supposed to be less for less. So my guess is it'll cut a few more corners and cost a few more dollars than Apple nerds like me would like, because as much as we love to spend Tim Cook's money, Tim Cook does not like spending Tim Cook's money at all. But it could just be the next best value in tech. If this entire whole rumor is real and not fake, or really fake. But Hartley Charlton says Mac Rumors has found code strings for a Mac 17,1 that apparently ties to the A18 Pro. And for every reason that we just ran over, it kind of makes the sense that kind of does, which means maybe Apple has finally figured out how to make a sort of new $500-ish with inflation laptop that's not a piece of junk.